His boss woke up terrified in his home. His daughter's 3 words changed everything. The thing about raising a child alone is that you cannot afford to be 2 people at once, so you learn to be one person very completely. Elijah Monroe had been learning this for 3 years. He was 39, a black man, a senior systems coordinator at a healthcare data firm called Meridian Analytics in Denver, Colorado. He had held the position for 5 years, earned the trust of his team, and built a reputation that could be summarized in the way his colleagues described him when he was not in the room: reliable, exact, not someone you had to follow up with. These were the things he had worked for. They were not glamorous, but they were solid, and after the last 3 years, solid was what he had needed most. His daughter, Imani, was 9 years old. Her mother, Rochelle, had died of a brain aneurysm 38 months ago, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, with no warning and no preparation, and no version of the story that made it make sense. Imani had been 6. Elijah had stood in a hospital hallway and been told by a doctor he had never met that the person he had built his entire adult life around was gone. And then he had driven home and made dinner because Imani had to eat, and that had been the beginning of understanding what it meant to be the only one left. He did not talk about this at work. He did not talk about it much anywhere. It was not something he had hidden. Anyone who asked would have been told, but it was not something he offered unprompted, because the people who heard it tended to look at him with the particular combination of sympathy and discomfort that he had learned to recognize as the expression of someone who wants to say the right thing and is not sure what it is. He understood the impulse. He simply did not have the energy to manage it on top of everything else. What he had was Imani. And, on the night that nearly ended everything he had built, Imani was the one who saved it, not with action, not with anything dramatic, but with 3 words spoken in the plainest possible voice to a woman who desperately needed to hear them. The Meridian Analytics end-of-year celebration was held on a Friday evening in December at the Aldgate Hotel in downtown Denver, a venue chosen by the events team for its views of the city and its reputation for a good kitchen. Elijah had been to 3 of these. He arrived on time, spoke to the people it was appropriate to speak to, declined every drink offered, and watched the clock with the focused attention of a man with a plan he intended to keep. He had promised Imani he would be home for the second half of her movie. This was a specific and important promise. They had a tradition, on Friday evenings, of watching a film together after dinner, and Imani had agreed to pause the movie at the halfway point and wait for him, which was a significant concession for a 9-year-old with strong feelings about narrative continuity. He was in the elevator going down to the lobby at 8:47 when his phone showed a text from a colleague on the 14th floor. "Have you seen Miss Pierce? She was at the bar an hour ago and now nobody can find her." Elijah stepped out of the elevator on the 14th floor. He found his division director, Sandra Pierce, in the hotel corridor between the event space and the service stairs, sitting on a bench that appeared to have been placed there for decorative purposes and was doing more functional work than intended. She was 51 years old, the director of systems integration, a woman who commanded every room she entered with the effortless authority of someone who had long ago stopped having to work for it. She was also, at this moment, the version of herself that only existed when something had gone very wrong beneath the surface. She was not simply drunk. Elijah had been around people who were simply drunk. This was different, the particular flatness of someone who had absorbed news they had not finished processing and had used the open bar to try to get ahead of it before it caught up with them. She was holding her phone with both hands and staring at the screen, and the screen was dark. A man Elijah did not know well, someone from the events vendor team, late 20s, with the particular attentiveness of a person who has decided this situation offers something, was sitting beside her on the bench and speaking to her in a low voice. Elijah walked over. He did not say anything to the man. He simply stood there, and his standing there communicated what needed to be communicated. And after a moment, the man from the vendor team stood up, said just making sure she was okay, and walked away. Elijah sat down on the bench beside Sandra. "Miss Pierce." She looked at him slowly. "Elijah, what happened?" It came out in pieces, the way difficult things come when the person telling them has not yet organized them into a shape they can manage. Sandra's mother had been moved to memory care that afternoon, not unexpectedly. This had been coming, But the finality of the phone call had arrived while she was already at the party with 2 glasses of wine inside her and nowhere private to fall apart. She had been trying to call her brother for 40 minutes. He was not picking up. Elijah sat with her for a few minutes. He did not offer advice or solutions. He just sat there and let her have the shape of the thing before he started asking practical questions. Because he had learned, from 3 years of being the only adult in a house with a grieving child, that there was a specific order to how people needed to be heard. Her phone was at 4%. The hotel was full. Her driver app was not loading. Her home address, when she tried to recall it for him, came out partially the street name and neighborhood but not the number, which had slipped in the particular way that stress does to memory when the memory is already working too hard on other things. He called his neighbor, Mr. Adeyemi, who was retired and kept a spare key and had helped with Imani before. Mr. Adeyemi answered on the second ring. "Of course," he said, in the tone of a man for whom the answer to this question had always been obvious. "Go. Imani will tell me what happens in her movie." He wrote the note at 11:15 at night, at the kitchen table, while Sandra slept on the sofa, and the house held the deep quiet it always had after Imani was asleep. He had made sure Sandra was settled water and 2 ibuprofen on the coffee table, her phone charging on the end table, a blanket from the hall closet. Her dress had a spill on the front. He had found a folded set of clothes in the spare room that belonged to his sister Tamara, who stayed over a few times a year and kept a drawer of basics. He placed them on the armchair nearest the sofa. He sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen and wrote, "Your name is Sandra Pierce, and you are the Director of Systems Integration at Meridian Analytics. My name is Elijah Monroe, and I am a Senior Systems Coordinator in your division. We were both at the company dinner at the Aldgate Hotel tonight. You were not feeling well and I was unable to reach anyone on your behalf, so I brought you to my home. Nothing happened. You are sleeping on the sofa. I am sleeping in the living room on the floor. Your phone is charging on the end table. There is water and ibuprofen on the coffee table. My phone number is below. Please call me when you wake up and I will drive you wherever you need to go. The clothes on the armchair belong to my sister. They are clean. I am sorry for any confusion this causes." He read it back once, the way he read everything once, not to admire it but to check it for accuracy, which was the only standard he applied to his own work. He folded it and stood it against the water glass. He looked in on Imani. She was asleep with her arms at her sides, which was the way she slept when she was in a deep sleep, not the restless way she slept when something was bothering her. The movie had been paused on the television in the living room. Mr. Adeyemi, thoughtful as always, had turned off the screen before he left, but left the pause saved. Elijah looked at it for a moment, then turned it off completely. He got a blanket from the closet, lay down on the living room floor, and spent the rest of the night at a level of rest that was adjacent to sleep but not quite it. He thought about Rochelle. He thought about the way she had moved through difficult situations, not with confidence exactly, but with a kind of practical grace, a willingness to pick up the next thing and deal with it without requiring the previous thing to be resolved first. He thought about how she had always said the people who mattered showed up when things were inconvenient, and how the people who showed up only when things were easy were not showing up. They were just passing through. He thought, I was passing by and I stopped. He thought, I hope that is enough. He thought, more specifically, about what enough meant in practical terms about the custody arrangement finalized 14 months ago, sole physical custody to him, with a standard review clause that could be triggered by either party if circumstances changed in a way that warranted reassessment. He had triggered nothing. He had given no one any reason to look at his life and find something other than a man raising a child carefully and without incident. The arrangement was stable. Imani was stable. He was stable. All of that was true, and all of that was currently in the hands of a woman sleeping on his sofa who did not yet know the full story. He had gone back and forth, lying there, on whether he had made the right call. Not about bringing Sandra home, there had not been another reasonable option, and he was at peace with that, but about staying. About not calling a colleague, not calling the company's on-call line, not creating a formal record of his own account before anything else was created. He had not done those things because doing them had felt like anticipating an accusation. and anticipating an accusation had felt like a small, private admission that the accusation was possible, and he was not willing to live that way. Rochelle had always said that was both his greatest strength and his most significant vulnerability. She had said it gently, the way she said things that were true and uncomfortable. He had not had a good answer for it then, and he did not have one now. Sandra woke at 6:52 with the particular disorientation of a person whose body is in a place her mind has not caught up to yet. The ceiling was the wrong color. The sofa was not hers. The room was unfamiliar in every detail, and familiar in the early morning quiet of a house where a child lived, which has a specific texture that is different from other kinds of quiet, a sense of something held in suspension, waiting to begin. She sat up. She waited for the room to stop shifting. She took inventory. Water on the table, aspirin beside it, a folded note standing against the glass, clothes on the armchair, phone on the end table, charged, plugged into a cable she had not put there. Her phone. She unlocked it. She did not read the note. She called her closest colleague at Meridian, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had been with the company for 12 years and who Sandra had trusted with difficult information before. Patricia answered on the third ring. "Sandra, what's wrong?" It was not a question the way Patricia said it. It was an assessment. Sandra told her what she had. Waking up in a strange house. A man from her division whose name she knew and whose face she knew. The gap in her memory between the hotel bar and this sofa. She kept her voice steady, because keeping her voice steady was something she did by reflex when delivering information she had not yet finished understanding. Patricia's response came back measured and immediate, in the voice of a woman who had navigated enough workplace situations to understand the architecture of them. "Listen to me carefully. You need to call HR before he wakes up. Today, first thing. You need to be the one who establishes the timeline. Sandra, not him. Your word against his is not a position you want to be in." "Patricia, I don't know what actually, that is the problem. You don't know. And not knowing, in a situation like this, needs to be documented on your terms before anyone else's." A pause. "I'm going to send a message to the HR on-call line right now, on your behalf, just flagging that there may be a concern. It doesn't commit you to anything." Sandra pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. She was not in a custody dispute. She was not in any active legal situation. But she was a 51-year-old woman who had spent 23 years earning the kind of professional standing that can be quietly undermined by a single story told in the wrong room, and Patricia knew this better than most people, because Patricia had watched it happen to two women they both knew, at two different companies, in the last 4 years. Patricia was trying to protect her. "Send it," Sandra said. "Done," Patricia said. "Call me back in an hour." The call ended. Sandra sat with the phone and the morning light, and the note that was still standing against the water glass, patient and unread. She did not reach for it. She was reaching for her shoes when she heard the sound, a door, light footsteps, the small and entirely unhurried movement of a child navigating a familiar space in the morning. The girl appeared in the hallway with a stuffed lion under one arm and her hair in the sleep-disheveled state of someone who had not yet addressed the morning. She was wearing pajamas with small planets on them. She looked at Sandra with clear, direct eyes and the expression of a child who sees no reason to be either alarmed or reserved about what she is looking at. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Sandra said. The girl looked at her with the frank assessment of a child who is gathering data. Then she said, in a completely ordinary voice, "My dad is a good person." She said it the way she might have said the sky is blue or this is Tuesday, as a fact that did not require argument or defense or context, because it was simply true and she saw no reason not to say it. Sandra went very still. The girl crossed to the kitchen with her lion, set it on the counter, and began the process of getting herself breakfast with the efficient independence of a child who had been doing this long enough to have a system. She opened the cabinet above the toaster. She got a bowl. She was entirely unconcerned with the effect her 3 words had just had on the woman sitting on the sofa. Sandra sat for a long moment. She thought about the words in the order she had received them. Not the full sentence, just the shape of it. A 9-year-old, still half asleep, crossing a living room she probably crossed every morning, and saying the thing that was most obviously true to her, the thing that organized her entire understanding of the world she lived in. My dad is a good person. No context, no argument, no awareness that the woman on the sofa had been holding a phone 30 seconds earlier, about to act on an assumption she had not tested. Just 3 words, said in the same tone she might have used to describe the weather or name a color, because to Imani, the statement was not an argument, it was simply a fact. The most fundamental fact of her life, stated the way fundamental facts get stated when you have lived with them long enough that you have stopped treating them as claims and started treating them as ground. Sandra looked at the room. On the bookshelf, a framed photograph, Elijah, younger, beside a woman who was laughing with her whole face, the unguarded laugh of someone completely comfortable with the person beside her. The woman was not here. Sandra understood this without needing to ask. On the refrigerator, a drawing and marker that said Dad's rules across the top in large, deliberate letters, followed by a numbered list in a child's handwriting that she could not read from here. On the floor near the front door, a pair of small sneakers and a larger pair placed beside them, toes pointing the same direction, heels aligned, as if someone had decided that this was where shoes lived and had been consistent about it. On the coffee table, the note. On the floor, 6 feet from where Sandra sat, the folded blanket that had been between a man and a hardwood floor for the entirety of the previous night. Sandra reached forward and picked up the note. She read it once. She read it again. She read the line about the clothes his sisters left in the spare room, clean, and the line about his phone number, and the offer to drive her wherever she needed to go, and she sat with the full, clear weight of what she had almost done before she had given a single moment's attention to what was in front of her. She picked up her phone. She called Patricia. Patricia answered immediately. "Can you retract that message?" Sandra said. A pause. "Sandra, I read the note, Patricia." Her voice was steady. It was costing something to keep it steady, but she kept it. "He wrote it before either of us woke up. He described everything, where I was, why I was here, where he slept. He put water on the table. He charged my phone. He slept on the floor." A pause. "His daughter just walked out and told me he is a good person. She said it the way you would tell someone that water is wet, like it was the most obvious thing in the world." She looked at the girl, who was eating cereal at the kitchen counter with her lion propped beside the bowl and a library book open against the orange juice container. "Retract the message." Silence from Patricia that had a specific texture, the silence of a person recalibrating, not arguing. "I'll retract it," Patricia said. "Thank you. And then I am calling HR myself and giving them the full account." "Okay," Patricia said quietly. "Okay, Sandra." The HR director was a careful, thorough man named David Chen who had the quality of making people feel that the thing they were telling him was being received completely, which was a skill Sandra had always respected in other people and was particularly grateful for this morning. She told him everything in the order it had happened and the order she had understood it, and she was explicit about the gap between those 2 orders and why it mattered. She said Elijah had done nothing wrong. She said the preliminary message did not reflect her account. She said she accepted full responsibility for the sequence of events that had led to it being sent. Then she asked for the hotel's corridor and lobby footage from the previous evening. The footage took 4 hours to obtain. It was reviewed that afternoon in David's office by David, Sandra, and Bridget Walsh from the company's legal team. It showed the corridor. It showed Sandra on the bench, and the vendor employee beside her. It showed Elijah arrive, stand, and by the clear evidence of his body and the other man's response, communicate something that resulted in the other man leaving. It showed Elijah sit down beside Sandra and stay there without touching her, without moving, simply present and attending. Then it showed the lobby. Elijah stood near the concierge desk for 13 minutes. He made calls. He checked something on his phone, the hotel availability. Sandra would learn later. He spoke to the concierge. He made more calls. He stood with the phone to his ear and waited through rings that did not become answers, and then dialed again. He did this with the unhurried, systematic patience of a man working through a list until the list was done. The last call connected at 9:03. His posture changed, the specific, nearly invisible dropping of tension that a body carries until it is released. 13 minutes, Sandra thought. 13 minutes of standing in a hotel lobby at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, trying to find someone else who would take this, before accepting that he was going to have to be the one to carry it. Bridget Walsh, reviewing the footage, said nothing for a long moment after it ended. Then she said, "The note, combined with this footage, is a complete account. There is no ambiguity." She looked at Sandra. He was trying to find a way not to have to bring her home. "I know," Sandra said, because he knew what it would look like. "Yes, and he did it anyway." Sandra looked at the closed laptop on David's desk. She thought about a 9-year-old girl crossing a living room with a stuffed lion, saying the most obvious thing in the world. "Yes," she said, "he did." David Chen withdrew the preliminary message and closed the file before the end of the business day. Sandra came to Elijah's house on a Wednesday. 5 days after David closed the matter, she called Elijah and asked if she could stop by after work. He said yes, in the manner of a man who has decided to see a thing through completely rather than let it trail off into the comfortable ambiguity of an unfinished conversation. She arrived at 6:45 in her work coat, holding nothing. Imani was on the living room floor, working on a drawing project that involved a large sheet of paper, at least 8 markers, and a degree of concentration that had not been interrupted by the sound of the door. She looked up when Sandra came in. She looked at her with the same direct, assessing attention she had used on Saturday morning. "Hi," she said. "Hi, Imani." Sandra looked at the drawing. "What are you making?" "A map," Imani said, "of a city I invented. It has a train system." She held it up briefly so Sandra could see the network of lines crossing the page. "The trains run every 6 minutes. That is a very efficient train system." "I know," Imani said, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has thought carefully about something and is pleased with the result. She went back to her drawing. Elijah was in the kitchen doorway. He had changed out of his work clothes, and he looked like a man who had slept properly for the first time in several days, which Sandra hoped was accurate. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I needed to." She looked at him directly. The way she looked at things, she was going to say precisely, "I owe you an apology that does not explain itself into something smaller. So, I am going to say it plainly. I let someone else act on my behalf before I had looked at what was in front of me. A message went to HR under my name before I had read your note, before I had given the situation any honest attention, and that message could have ended your career and changed your daughter's life. I am sorry. Not for a mistake, for a choice. I made it quickly and badly, and the fact that I corrected it does not change that it happened." Elijah stood with that. On the living room floor, a marker cap clicked. He had thought about what he would say when this moment came, and he had decided, over 5 days of thinking about it, that the most honest response was the simplest one. "You were carrying something that night," he said. "Your mother. The phone calls that were not being answered. I understood why you moved fast. I do not think it was a good decision, but I understand why it was the one you made." He looked at her evenly. "You came back and you corrected it. That is not nothing. It should not have required correcting." "No," he said. "It should not." He paused. "But here we are." Sandra held his gaze. What he had given her was not absolution or warmth, or the comfortable resolution of a thing fully forgiven. It was something cleaner, the honest acknowledgement of 2 people standing on either side of something real, both of them still standing, which was, in its own way, a kind of grace. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did, for her." She glanced at Imani. Elijah looked at his daughter, who had added a new station to the train map and was labeling it in careful capital letters. "I do most things for her," he said simply. 4 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in January, Elijah sat in the second row of the Denver Civic Youth Choir's winter performance at the Garner Center for the Arts. Imani had been in the choir for 8 months. Tonight was her first public performance in the main hall, which seated 400 people and had acoustics that the director had described, at the parent orientation, as among the finest in the city for unamplified voice. Elijah had arrived 40 minutes early. He had brought binoculars, which was probably unnecessary given that he was in the second row, but which he had brought anyway because he was the kind of person who prepared for every contingency. He had tested the recording on his phone and confirmed the battery level twice. When Imani walked out onto the stage with the other choristers, she did what she always did in moments of arrival. She located him first. with the efficient, sweeping attention of someone who needs to confirm one specific fact before she can concentrate on everything else. When she found him, something in her face settled into readiness. He raised one hand. She raised her chin and faced forward. At the rear of the hall, near the leftmost aisle, Sandra sat in the last row with her program folded in her lap. She had found the performance listed on the choir's public website and had bought a ticket without mentioning it to Elijah, because this was not something she was doing for him to see. She was doing it because some debts are not settled in conversations, and the only way to pay them is to be present in the place where the thing that was nearly taken actually lives. The lights went down. The choir director raised his hands. When the first chord rose from the stage, Sandra felt the particular quality of it, not just the sound, but the specific feeling of being in a room where something irreplaceable is happening, where the ordinary becomes briefly visible as the extraordinary thing it actually is, and you understand, sitting there, how close it had come to being a room you were not allowed to be in. She thought about Imani in the living room on Saturday morning, crossing the floor in her planet pajamas, entirely unaware of what she was doing. 3 words, in an ordinary voice, the most consequential 3 words Sandra had heard in years, and they had been delivered with the total lack of ceremony that belongs only to the deepest truths, the ones that do not need to be argued for because they have never been in doubt. She looked at the stage. She found Imani in the second row, third from the left, chin up, eyes on the conductor, entirely present in the music. She stayed for the entire performance. She left before the lights came up. The policy was submitted to the leadership team on the second Thursday of February and ratified without significant amendment. Sandra had written it in the evenings over 2 weeks, carefully and without haste, and it said what she needed it to say. Mandatory safe transportation for all company events at which alcohol was served, a designated staff support contact at any event exceeding 30 people, and a formal protection clause for any employee who provided assistance to a colleague in distress, ensuring that the act of helping could not, without independent evidence of misconduct, be the basis for a disciplinary inquiry. The leadership team asked 5 questions. The 5th was whether the policy had arisen from a specific incident involving Meridian Analytics employees. Sandra said yes. She said it with the same directness she had brought to every difficult conversation in her career, because she had learned, over 23 years of professional life, that the things worth standing behind were generally the ones that required you to actually stand behind them. The policy was ratified unanimously. Elijah read about it on a Monday morning, in an all-staff email he nearly scrolled past while reading through the weekend backlog at his desk. He stopped when the subject line registered. He opened it. He read it twice. He sat for a moment with the weight of it not large, not dramatic, the quiet, solid weight of a thing that had been done carefully and without fuss by someone who did not have to do it. That afternoon, he picked Imani up from school, and on the drive home, she told him about a disagreement at lunch that had been resolved satisfactorily, and about a book she had finished, and about the fact that the school's main hallway now smelled like the cleaning product they used on the gym floors, and she found it unsettling. He listened to all of it with the full attention it deserved, because he had learned, from 3 years of being the only adult available, that the things Imani brought home from the day were not small things, they were the material of her life, and she was offering them to him, and the least he could do was receive them properly. At home, he made dinner, and they ate together at the kitchen table, and Imani told him more about the city she was designing, the train system, the park in the center, the building she had decided would be a library that was also a greenhouse. People can read among the plants, she said. It will be calming. That does sound calming, Elijah said. I am going to name the city after Mom, she said. Elijah looked at his daughter. I think she would like that, he said. Imani nodded. The nod of someone who has made a decision and does not need it confirmed but appreciates the confirmation anyway. She ate her dinner. He ate his. Outside, Denver was cold and clear in the way it gets in February, the kind of cold that has no apology for itself, and the kitchen was warm with the ordinary warmth of an ordinary evening. And the woman who had sat at this table 10,000 times before was not here, and her absence was present in everything, and her presence was present in the girl sitting across from him, and Elijah Monroe sat in the warmth of it, and felt, as he felt every day now, that he had been given an impossible amount of loss and an impossible amount of reason to keep going, and that somehow, impossibly, both of those things were true at the same time. He picked up his fork. Outside, the night was clear and cold and full of stars. It was enough. It had always been, exactly enough.